You don't expect something small to change the way you see your family. That's the part people get wrong when they talk about cutting ties or setting boundaries. They imagine a single dramatic moment, raised voices, slammed doors.
Someone finally saying the thing everyone's been avoiding for years. That isn't how it usually happens. Most of the time, it's something so small, you almost miss it. Something that could be explained away if you wanted to keep pretending.
Something wrapped in tradition, or humor, or celebration, so that calling it out makes you look like the problem. This was one of those moments, and it didn't start with the cake.
It started years earlier, in ways I didn't fully understand until much later. My name is Daniel. I'm 41 years old. I have 2 children. Lily is 10, Noah is 7. I've been married to my wife Hannah for 12 years. We live a quiet life.
Not impressive, not embarrassing, just steady. That word matters. Steady doesn't get applause in my family. Growing up, I learned early that there were 2 kinds of attention. The kind you earned by excelling loudly, and the kind you earned by being useful. I became the second kind. My sister Rebecca was always the first. She was 3 years older, smarter in the way that got noticed, louder in the way that filled rooms. Teachers praised her. Relatives asked about her future. My parents told stories about her achievements like they were trophies they carried around. I was the kid who didn't cause trouble, the one who did what he was supposed to do, the one who learned quickly that praise was rare, but expectations were constant. When Rebecca succeeded, it was celebrated. When I succeeded, it was assumed. That dynamic never really went away. It just changed clothes as we got older. By the time we had kids, the pattern had shifted to the next generation. Rebecca's son, Ethan, became the new centerpiece. He was confident, sharp, comfortable speaking over people, the kind of kid adults described as going places. My parents loved that about him. They saw themselves in him, or at least the version of themselves they preferred to remember. My kids were different.
Lily was thoughtful. She liked books and puzzles and building small, precise things with her hands. Noah was curious, endlessly curious, the kind of kid who asked questions until adults ran out of patience. They didn't perform. They didn't boast. They didn't interrupt to make sure they were seen. And slowly, almost invisibly, they faded in my parents' eyes. I noticed it in small ways. Birthday cards arriving late, gifts that felt generic, phone calls that ended quickly, questions that never came. At first, I told myself it didn't matter, that kids don't keep score the way adults do, but love doesn't have to be loud to be real. I wanted to believe that. My wife noticed sooner than I did. They don't really see them, Hannah said once. After a family dinner where Lily spent 2 hours drawing quietly while everyone talked around her. They do, I said automatically. Hannah didn't argue. She just nodded in that way. That meant she was letting me have my denial a little longer. Then came my father's 68th birthday. The invitation didn't come from him. It came from Rebecca. A message dropped into the family group chat, brief and efficient. Dad's birthday dinner, Saturday, 6 p.m. Same place as last year. No warmth, no emphasis, no suggestion that our presence mattered. I stared at the message longer than necessary. My phone was on the kitchen counter. Hannah was washing dishes. The kids were in the living room arguing quietly over a board game. We don't have to go, Hannah said without turning around. I know, I replied. That exchange had become routine. There was always a calculation with family events. Attend and absorb the quiet slights, or don't attend and deal with the fallout later. Guilt dressed up as concern, distance framed as disrespect. Birthdays felt harder to skip. They carried a weight that other gatherings didn't, a sense that absence would be noticed, remembered, filed away. So we went. The restaurant was already busy when we arrived. Warm lighting, brick walls. The low hum of conversation, layered with clinking glasses. The kind of place that tried very hard to feel important without being intimidating. Rebecca and her family were already seated. My parents sat at the head of the table. My father leaned back comfortably, laughing with the waiter, as if they were old friends. My mother adjusted napkins and place settings, focused on appearances. We approached. My mother stood halfway and leaned in for a hug that barely connected. "Hi," she said, brushing Lily's shoulder. "You're tall." That was it. No hug, no follow-up, no real engagement. My father nodded at me. "Traffic okay?" "What's the matter?" My father nodded at me. Yes, I said. Conversation moved on immediately. Rebecca launched into a story about Ethan's school, a recent award, a teacher who had praised him, a future already being spoken about like a guarantee. My parents leaned in, visibly engaged. "That's my grandson," my father said proudly. I watched Lily sit quietly, folding her napkin into neat shapes. Noah swung his legs beneath the table, glancing around, waiting for someone to notice him. No one did. I told myself it wasn't intentional, that people get caught up, that attention isn't a finite resource. That's the lie you tell yourself when you're trying to preserve something that's already slipping. Dinner continued like that. Plates arrived, wine was poured, stories were told. Rebecca asked my father about retirement. My mother chimed in. Mark nodded along. No one asked me anything. No one asked the kids anything. Hannah caught my eye once, her expression careful, questioning. I shook my head slightly. Not here, not now. "We're doing the cake now," she announced. Before dessert, the waiter appeared, pushing a cart. The cake was chocolate, smooth frosting, elegant lettering. My father leaned forward, smiling. And then I saw the words, "Happy birthday, Dad." From the successful ones, Rebecca, Mark, and Ethan. I read it once, then again. My brain stalled, trying to process what I was seeing. I waited for the punchline, for someone to laugh and clarify, for another cake to appear. Rebecca noticed my expression and waved her hand dismissively. "Oh," she said lightly, "this is just from us. You know, the ones who actually managed to make something of themselves." She laughed, not sharply, not cruelly, casually. My father chuckled. My mother adjusted the candles. I looked at my kids. Lily's face had gone very still, the way kids look when they're trying to understand something painful without reacting. Noah leaned toward me. "Gad," he whispered. "Did we forget to sign the cake?" Before I could answer, Ethan laughed. "Guess you didn't deserve one." The table laughed. Not loudly, just enough. I waited for someone to stop it. No one did. Something settled in me then. Not anger, not shock. Finality. I stood up. Slowly. "Come on," I said to my kids. My father frowned. "Where are you going? Cake just got here. We're heading home." Rebecca scoffed. "Seriously, over a joke?" I didn't answer. I helped Lily out of her chair. Noah followed without a word. Hannah stood beside me, steady and silent. That's the part that stuck with me later. Not the cake, not the laughter, not even Ethan's comment. Just the absence of a goodbye. Years of conditioning told me to soften things, to explain, to smooth the moment over, so no one would feel uncomfortable. I didn't do any of that. We walked out into the cool night air, like we were leaving a store that no longer sold anything we needed. The parking lot was dimly lit, sodium lights buzzing faintly overhead. I could hear laughter from inside the restaurant, spilling out through the door we'd just exited. It felt surreal how fast life resumed without us, like nothing had happened, like we hadn't mattered enough to disrupt the evening. Lily walked close to Hannah, her hand wrapped tightly around her mother's fingers. Noah followed a step behind me, quiet, in a way that always meant he was thinking harder than he knew how to articulate. No one asked questions. That was new. Usually, when we left family events early, there were whispered negotiations in the car. Did something happen? Are you okay? Should we have stayed? This time, there was none of that. Just the sound of doors unlocking, seatbelts clicking. I started the engine. The radio stayed off. At the first red light, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was staring out the window, her reflection faint in the glass. Noah leaned his head against the seat, eyes open but unfocused. "Dad," he said quietly after a minute, "are they mad at us?" "No," I said, maybe too quickly. "They're not mad at you. But we didn't get our names," he said. "Not accusing, just factual." I swallowed. "I know." He nodded and didn't say anything else. That hurt more than if he'd cried. The drive home felt longer than usual, even though the route was the same. Every familiar turn felt heavier, like we were carrying something invisible with us. By the time we pulled into the driveway, Noah had fallen asleep. His head tilted awkwardly to one side, mouth slightly open. I carried him inside, careful not to wake him, suddenly aware of how light he still felt in my arms. Too young to be learning lessons like this. Lily went straight to her room. Hannah helped me tuck Noah into bed, then stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to his breathing settle. "He noticed everything," she said quietly. "I know. We didn't talk about the restaurant. Not yet."
We moved through the familiar bedtime routine like muscle memory. Pajamas, brushing teeth, one last sip of water. When I checked on Lily, she was sitting on her bed with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at nothing in particular. "Hey," I said, sitting beside her. "You okay?" She shrugged. "That was never a good sign. Did we do something wrong?" she asked finally. "No," I said immediately. "You didn't." "Then why?" She stopped herself, pressing her lips together. "Never mind," I waited. She didn't continue. That silence told me she'd already started doing the thing I'd learned to do at her age, editing herself to avoid making adults uncomfortable. I sat there longer than necessary, then kissed the top of her head and turned off the light. After the house went quiet, Hannah and I ended up in the kitchen without really planning to be there. The overhead light was too bright. The rest of the house felt dark and hollow by comparison. She poured herself a glass of water, then another. "That wasn't a joke," she said finally. "No," I agreed. "They knew exactly what they were doing." I nodded. "They always do." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I'm done," she said simply. "I'm not doing this to the kids anymore." There it was, the thing we'd both been circling for years without saying out loud. I didn't argue. Instead, I sat down at the table and stared at my phone. The screen lit up with notifications I hadn't checked. A message from Rebecca. Another from my mother. I didn't open them. I knew what they'd say. Some version of, "You're overreacting." Some version of, "It was just a joke." Some version of, "Why do you always make things so difficult?" I typed slowly, deleting words as I went. I didn't want to sound angry. I didn't want to sound emotional. I wanted it to be clear, final, impossible to misinterpret. "Please don't invite us to family events anymore. We're not your punchline." I read it 3 times. Then I hit send. The phone buzzed, almost immediately. I turned it face down. Hannah watched me for a moment, then reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Whatever happens next," she said, "we handle it together." I nodded, though at that point, I had no idea what next looked like. That night, sleep didn't come easily. I lay awake replaying the scene in the restaurant over and over, noticing details I hadn't processed in the moment. The way my father didn't even look surprised. The way my mother smiled like this was all perfectly reasonable. The way Rebecca hadn't hesitated. It wasn't spontaneous. That was the realization that settled in somewhere around 2 a.m. The cake hadn't been an afterthought. It had been planned, ordered, written out carefully in frosting. Someone had said the words from the successful ones out loud to a baker and thought, yes, that's appropriate. And no one had thought to include my kids. Or maybe they had and decided not to. That distinction mattered. The next morning, my phone was quiet. No apology, no explanation, no missed calls, just silence. I made breakfast, packed lunches, drove the kids to school like it was any other day. The normalcy felt surreal, like we were moving through a world that hadn't caught up to what had shifted. At a stoplight near the school, Lily suddenly said, "Dad, yeah? Are we still family?" The question hit me harder than anything the night before. "Yes," I said firmly. "We are." She nodded slowly. "Okay." I watched her walk into the school building, backpack bouncing lightly against her shoulders, and felt something in my chest crack open. This wasn't about me anymore. It never really had been. On the drive to work, my phone finally rang. My mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then another call. My father. I didn't answer. At lunch, I checked the messages. Rebecca, seriously, you embarrassed everyone last night. My mother. I don't understand. Why you're being so dramatic? My father. Call me. We need to talk. None of them asked about the kids. That was the detail that made my decision feel permanent. That evening, when I picked Lily and Noah up from school, they ran toward me smiling, talking over each other about their day. Lily had gotten an A on a spelling test. Noah had scored a goal at recess. I listened. I praised. I asked questions. I did the thing my parents hadn't done. And that night, after dinner, when Lily sat at the table doing homework and Noah sprawled on the floor with his toys, Hannah looked at me and said, "You know, this is going to get worse before it gets better." "I know," I said. "But you're not backing down." "No," she nodded. "Good. That was the first night I didn't feel guilty, not relieved, just steady, like I'd finally stopped trying to balance something that was never meant to be held by one person alone. I didn't know yet how my family would react. I didn't know how ugly it would get. I didn't know what bridges would burn, or who would pretend nothing had happened. All I knew was this: the silence that followed tasted better than any cake ever could. The silence didn't last. It never does. People like my parents don't tolerate silence for long. Not because they miss you, but because silence removes their control. It takes away their ability to narrate the story while it's happening. So when silence appears, they rush to fill it. The first call came the next morning while I was at work. I watched my phone vibrate on the desk, my mother's name lighting up the screen like a warning. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down and kept typing, even though I wasn't really reading the words on my screen. 10 minutes later, my father called, then Rebecca, then my mother again. By lunchtime, there were 6 missed calls and a handful of messages I still hadn't opened. I told myself I'd deal with it later. That's what I always told myself. At 1:47 p.m., a text came through from my mother that I couldn't ignore. Not because of what it said, but because of how it said it. I don't know what's going on with you, but this behavior is very concerning. That word did a lot of work in my family. It never meant concern. It meant you're stepping out of line. I waited until I got home to listen to the voicemails. The first was from my father. His voice was calm, measured, disappointed in that familiar way. "Daniel, I don't know why you stormed out last night. It was unnecessary. We were celebrating. You took it the wrong way. Call me back." Stormed. I pictured us walking quietly out of the restaurant, chairs pushed in, voices low, children silent. The word didn't fit, but that was the point. If he made it sound dramatic, then my reaction became the problem. The second voicemail was from my mother. Hers was softer, but sharper underneath. "I just want to understand why you do something like that in front of the kids. It sends a wrong message. Families joke. You need to learn how to take one." I stopped the message before it finished. The third was from Rebecca. "I honestly can't believe you embarrassed Dad like that. Everyone noticed. You always do this. You turn everything into some kind of statement." That one stuck. "You always do this. It was easier for them. If this wasn't about the cake, or the kids, or the years of imbalance, it was easier if this was just my personality flaw resurfacing." I didn't call anyone back. That night at dinner, Lily was quieter than usual. Noah chatted about a game he'd played at recess, but Lily mostly pushed her food around her plate. "Everything okay?" Hannah asked gently. Lily nodded, then shook her head. "I just don't get it," she said. "If it was a joke, why didn't it feel funny?" Hannah and I exchanged a look. "That's a really good question," I said. "And what's the answer?" Noah asked, genuinely curious. I thought carefully. Sometimes people say something as a joke when they don't want to admit it was hurtful. Lily considered that. "So, they didn't mean to be nice?" "No," I said. "They didn't." She nodded, absorbing it with that unsettling maturity kids develop when adults force them to. After the kids went to bed, Hannah picked up my phone from the counter. "You have 12 unread messages," she said flatly. "I know. You don't have to respond. I know. But you might want to read them." I did. They followed a pattern. First came confusion, then disappointment, then guilt. My mother wrote about how hurt my father was, how birthdays were important to him, how she'd stayed up late worrying. Rebecca accused me of teaching my kids to be entitled. My father wrote, "You've always had a chip on your shoulder about success." That one made me laugh, not out loud, just a sharp exhale through my nose. Success, in my family, was defined very specifically. It wasn't about stability, or kindness, or showing up consistently. It was about optics. The next morning, I got a call from my aunt, my mother's sister. We hadn't spoken in months. "I just wanted to check in," she said, her voice careful. "Your mum's really upset." "I imagine she is." "She doesn't understand why you'd do this over a cake." "There wasn't just a cake," I said. A pause. "Well, my aunt," said slowly. "You know how kids joke?" "Yes," I said. "I do." Another pause. "You might want to smooth this over," she added. "For the sake of the family." That phrase again. For the sake of the family. It always meant the same thing. Someone had to absorb the damage so everyone else could remain comfortable. I didn't call her back either. Over the next few days, the narrative started shifting. At first, they said I misunderstood. Then they said I overreacted. Then they said I was being dramatic. By the end of the week, They were saying I'd caused a scene and upset the children by leaving. That last part was my favorite. It was impressive how quickly they managed to turn my kids into collateral damage of my own behavior. Hannah saw it happening before I did. They're rewriting it, she said one night, scrolling through social media.
Your mom posted something vague about adult children who weaponize their kids. I closed my eyes. That's new, I said. Not really, Hannah replied, just louder. I thought about responding, about correcting the story publicly, about defending myself. I didn't, because deep down, I knew something important. People who believe lies don't want clarification. They want reinforcement. The next escalation came the following weekend. Rebecca showed up at our house unannounced. I opened the door and knew immediately this wasn't a peace offering. She stood stiffly on the porch, arms crossed, jaw tight. Can we talk? She asked. I considered saying no. I didn't. She walked in like she owned the place, eyes scanning the living room. So, she said, is this where you explain what the hell that was? I waited. You really embarrassed Dad, she continued. Do you have any idea how that made him look? That was the first thing she led with. Not the kids, not my wife, my father's image. I'm not responsible for how Dad looks, I said. She scoffed. You always do this. You act like you're morally superior just because you chose a different life. I didn't choose a different life, I said. I chose a quieter one. She stared at me. You think you're better than us? No, I said. I think I'm done competing. That shut her up for a second. Then she leaned forward. Ethan is a kid. He was joking. So were you, I said. So were Mum and Dad. Everyone was joking, except my kids. She rolled her eyes. You're projecting. Maybe, I said. But my kids still went home empty-handed, while yours laughed. That's not fair, she snapped. Neither was the cake. She stared at me for a long moment, then shook her head. You've always been like this, sensitive, brooding. Looking for slights. There it was, the final reduction. If I was just like this, then nothing needed to change. She left without saying goodbye. That night, Lily asked why Aunt Rebecca had come over. To talk, I said. Did you fix it? No, I said. Good, she replied quietly. That surprised me. Why good? Because fixing it usually means pretending it didn't hurt. I sat there for a moment, stunned. Kids don't need explanations nearly as much as adults do. They just need honesty. By the end of the week, invitations stopped. No Sunday lunch. No casual check-ins. No follow-up. The silence returned. But this time, it felt different. Sharper, more deliberate, and beneath it all, there was something else. Waiting. The waiting was the worst part. Not because I felt guilty, but because I could feel the shape of their expectation pressing in on the edges of my life. Like they assumed this silence was temporary. Like they believed, deep down, that I would eventually fold the way I always had. They were used to that. A few weeks passed, then another. No calls, no texts, no invitations, no sudden attempts at reconciliation. Just nothing. At first, that absence felt like punishment. The way silence often does when it's wielded by people who think they're withdrawing love to make a point. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it started to feel like something else. Relief. I noticed it one morning while making coffee. The house was quiet. The kids were getting dressed upstairs. Hannah was humming softly while packing lunches. My phone sat untouched on the counter. No buzzing, no dread, no rehearsed explanations forming in my head before the day had even started. The absence had created space. And space does strange things when you're not used to it. It reveals how much noise you've been living with. Lily started sleeping better. I noticed it because she stopped creeping into our room in the middle of the night. She stayed in her bed until morning, waking up rested, unburdened by dreams she couldn't name. Noah laughed more. Loud, full-bodied laughter that shook the walls. The kind that comes from feeling safe enough to be unguarded. Hannah and I argued less, not because everything was perfect, but because there was no longer a third invisible presence in every conversation. No looming obligation, no unspoken calendar of emotional debt. One evening, about a month after the birthday dinner, Hannah looked up from her book and said, "Do you realize no one's told us we're being unreasonable in weeks?" I smiled. I hadn't noticed. That's the point. The kids adjusted faster than I expected. Kids are good at adapting when the truth is simple. Grandma and Grandpa weren't around right now. We didn't say why in detail. We didn't need to. The kids filled in the blanks with their own observations. Lily stopped asking when we'd see them again. Noah asked once, then never brought it up. Instead, new routines took root. Saturday mornings became pancake mornings. Not rushed, not negotiated, just ours. We started taking long walks in the park nearby. Lily brought a notebook and sketched trees. Noah collected rocks he insisted were fossils. No one commented on our parenting. No one corrected us. No one ranked our children against anyone else. That was when I realized how much of my energy had been spent bracing. Then the first test came. It arrived disguised as politeness. A text from my mother. I've been thinking a lot. Maybe we can put everything behind us. Life's too short. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just an invitation to a race. I stared at the message for a long time. The old version of me would have replied. Carefully, calmly, something conciliatory but firm. Something that left the door open. I didn't reply. The next message came 2 days later. Your father misses the kids. That one almost worked. Not because it was true, but because it was familiar. Because it framed my boundary as cruelty. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too. Then I put the phone down and went outside to help Noah ride his bike. He fell twice, skinned his knee, got back up both times. Can you hold the seat just a little? He asked. I'm not holding it, I said. You're doing it. He frowned, pedaled. Then his eyes widened. I'm doing it. You are. He rode the length of the sidewalk laughing, unsteady but free. That was my answer. Weeks later, Rebecca tried again, this time through a family friend, someone neutral enough to pretend they weren't carrying a message. She just wants things to go back to normal, the friend said gently over coffee. She's worried about the kids growing up without their grandparents. I nodded. They're growing up with parents who protect them. The friend blinked, unprepared for that. Normal, I'd learned, was just another word for familiar pain. Another invitation came, this one more formal. My father's handwriting on an envelope. Inside, a card. No apology. Just an announcement of a family gathering. A barbecue. Casual. Low pressure. Hannah read it, then handed it back to me. Do you want to go? She asked. I pictured the backyard, the forced smiles, the careful choreography. The unspoken expectation that I'd pretend nothing had happened. No, I said. I don't. She nodded. Okay, that was it. No debate, no guilt spiral. We threw the card away. That night, I noticed something else. I didn't feel angry. Anger requires engagement, attention, energy. What I felt instead was distance, measured, intentional, the kind you choose because you finally understand what closeness has been costing you. By early summer, the story had settled. Not the one they were towing, the one we were living. We weren't estranged. We were unavailable. Unavailable for jokes at our children's expense. Unavailable for narratives that required our silence. Unavailable for conditional love. And in that unavailability, something solid began to form. A new definition of family. One that didn't revolve around who shared blood, but who showed up without keeping score. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain it. I just lived it. And slowly, unmistakably, the waiting stopped. When the waiting stopped, something else took its place. Memory. Not the dramatic kind. Not flashbacks or sudden realizations. Just small, inconvenient recollections, surfacing at random moments, now that there was finally room for them. I noticed it first while folding laundry. One of Lily's shirts had a faint stain on the sleeve. I scrubbed at it absent-mindedly, then froze as a memory slid into place. Her 5th birthday, my parents' house, a backyard full of balloons. A magician we'd paid for ourselves because things were tight that year for them. Lily had tried to show my mother a card trick she'd learned. My mother smiled, nodded, then turned away mid-sentence when Rebecca's son ran over shouting. The memory ended there, not with anger, just with Lily standing still, card in her hand, smile unsure. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. Kids don't notice everything. No need to make a big deal. Now I folded the shirt carefully and wondered how many moments like that I'd minimized out of convenience. The memories didn't accuse. They just lined up. A school play where Noah scanned the audience for familiar faces that never showed.
A phone call where my father congratulated me on a promotion, then spent 20 minutes praising Rebecca's husband for his real ambition. Christmas gifts sorted into neat piles, ours always smaller, but presented with exaggerated cheer, as if enthusiasm could make up the difference. I hadn't been blind. I'd been strategic. Seeing clearly would have required action. And action would have disrupted the structure I'd been trained to protect, family harmony, which, I was learning, had always meant my compliance. Hannah noticed the shift before I said anything. "You've been quieter," she said one night, as we sat on the porch, summer air thick and slow. "I'm thinking," I said. "About them." "About us," I replied. "About how much I edited myself." She nodded. "You did. I waited for judgment. It didn't come." "Do you regret it?" she asked. I thought about it carefully. "No," I said. "I regret not noticing what it cost. That was the difference. Regret without self-content. Understanding without collapse. Time passed differently now." Weeks folded into months. Holidays came and went without negotiation. Thanksgiving was smaller, quieter, better. The kids helped cook. Noah spilled cranberry sauce everywhere. Lily burned the rolls. We laughed without checking our volume. No comparisons, no rankings, no invisible scoreboard hovering over the table. After dinner, Millie leaned back in her chair and said, "I like our holidays." "So do I," Hannah said. I didn't say anything because my throat tightened unexpectedly. That night, after the kids were asleep, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Not the posed ones, the in-between ones. Photos where my smile looked prettiest, where my shoulders were tight, where I stood just slightly apart from the rest of my family, even when I was physically close. I hadn't been imagining it. Distance had always been there. I just finally stopped trying to close it alone. In late autumn, I ran into my father at the grocery store. It was accidental. Neither of us had prepared for it. He looked older, smaller, his confidence dimmed around the edges. We stood there awkwardly, cereal boxes between us like a neutral zone. "Hi," he said. "Hi." A pause. "I haven't seen the kids in a while," he said. "I know." Another pause. He waited. I didn't fill the space. "We didn't mean anything by that cake," he said finally. "You know how your mother gets." There it was. The olive branch that doubled as a deflection. I felt something then. Not anger, not triumph. Clarity. "This didn't start with the cake," I said calmly. He frowned. "Then what is this about?" I considered explaining. Years of imbalance. Conditional pride. Quiet exclusions. Then I realized something important. He wasn't asking to understand. He was asking for a shortcut back to normal. "I'm not doing this here," I said gently. His face tightened. "So that's it." "That's not what I said," I replied. "But I'm not negotiating my kid's worth." He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. We parted without resolution. And for the first time, that felt okay. Because closure isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you stop asking for. Driving home, I thought about the version of myself who would have replayed that conversation for weeks. He would have drafted follow-up messages in his head, who would have wondered if he'd been too harsh. That version felt distant now. Not gone. Just retired. At home, Noah ran to show me a drawing he'd made. Stick figures, a house, 4 of us holding hands. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing. "That's us," he said simply. No grandparents, no extended branches, just us. Not out of spite, out of focus. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she asked, "Do you think people can change?" "Yes," I said, "but only if they want to." She nodded, satisfied. "Do you think we're bad for leaving?" she asked quietly. I swallowed. "No," I said firmly. "We're brave." She smiled and turned over. I sat there longer than necessary, listening to her breathe, understanding something I hadn't before. This wasn't about walking away. It was about walking forward without dragging the past behind us. And the further we went, the lighter everything felt. The lighter feeling didn't come all at once. It settled in gradually, like your body adjusting after you put something heavy down and don't immediately realize how much it was weighing you. I stopped checking my phone before family events I wasn't attending. Stopped bracing for comments that never came. Stopped explaining myself in conversations that no longer existed. It wasn't dramatic. It was mundane. And that was the clearest sign it was real. Winter arrived quietly that year. The kind of winter that makes everything smaller. Streets emptier, houses warmer by contrast. We decorated our place without consulting anyone. No traditions to honor. No expectations to meet. Just what felt right. Lily insisted the tree be crooked. Noah wanted all the ornaments clumped on one side. Hannah let them. It looks like us, she said, stepping back. It did. On Christmas Eve, we stayed home. No schedule. No drive. No performance. We made soup, watched a movie halfway through before the kids lost interest, and built a blanket fort instead. At one point, I caught myself waiting for the familiar tension. The sense that we were supposed to be somewhere else, that we were missing something important. Nothing came. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Hannah and I sat on the floor with our backs against the couch. You okay? She asked. I think so, I said. I keep expecting it to feel sad. And it doesn't. She smiled softly. That's because peace isn't loud. A week later, a package arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside were gifts for the kids, carefully wrapped. Expensive. A note in my mother's handwriting. We love them. We hope you reconsider. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just leverage. I stared at the box for a long time. The old instinct stirred. The urge to soften. To accept the offering as a bridge. Then Millie walked in and saw the box. Who's it from? She asked. I didn't lie. Grandma and Grandpa. She looked at it, then at me. Do we have to open it? The question landed, harder than anything else that year. No, I said. We don't. She nodded, relieved. We donated the gifts that afternoon. It wasn't a statement. It was maintenance. Boundaries, I'd learned, aren't built once. They're upheld quietly, over and over, especially when they're tested politely. Spring came. With it, birthdays, school events, small victories. My parents didn't attend any of them. Neither did Rebecca. The kids stopped noticing. That was the strangest part. Absence loses its power when it's consistent. One afternoon, Lily came home excited about a project on family trees. We have to present ours next week, she said. I hesitated. Do you want help with it? Yes, she said, but I don't want it to be complicated. So we kept it simple. Branches that led to people who were present. Names that came with memories. When she presented it to the class, she didn't apologize for what wasn't there. She spoke clearly, proudly. Afterwards, she told me, my teacher said families look different, and that's okay. That's true, I said. She smiled. I think ours looks strong. I believed her. Months later, I ran into my mother at a pharmacy. She looked startled to see me, then hopeful. How are the kids? She asked. They're good. She waited. I didn't elaborate. I miss them, she said. I know. She frowned, confused by my calm. You could bring them by sometime. I met her eyes. Nothing's changed, I said gently. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, what was the most unreckled? Not understanding. We said goodbye, politely. I didn't replay the interaction. Afterwards. I didn't imagine alternative endings. That's how I knew it was done. The boundary had moved from my mouth into my bones. One night, long after the kids were asleep, Hannah asked me something unexpected. If they apologized, she said carefully, really apologized, would you consider it? I thought about it, not hypothetically, honestly. Maybe, I said. But it wouldn't change the rules. What rules? That access to our kids isn't earned through gifts or guilt, I said. And love doesn't come with rankings. She nodded. That sounds fair. Fair. Such a simple word. It had taken me decades to realize how rarely it had applied to me. Summer returned. Life kept expanding outward. New friendships, deeper ones. People who showed up without needing to be impressed. People who didn't need me to shrink so they could feel tall. One evening, as we sat outside watching the kids chase fireflies, Noah said, Dad, yeah, I like our family. So do I said. Lily added, it feels calm. It did. Not perfect, not immune to pain, just honest. And that honesty was the thing I'd been protecting all along, even before I knew how. I used to think walking away was failure, that endurance meant loyalty. That family was something you endured, not something that held you. I know better now. Family is where your kids don't learn to laugh at themselves to survive. It's where love isn't conditional. It's where silence doesn't punish. And sometimes, it's smaller than you were taught to expect, but it's real, and it's enough.